Okay, so why don't I call the meeting to order? We've got 3 out of 4 of us here, so we have a quorum. And the first item on the agenda was a clerk of the meeting. I'm happy to play that role again. I will say that Shannon sent me the AI recording, the summary of the meeting last time. And it was funny because it included in it all of the small talk that we had at the beginning of the call. Basically it says, the committee members began by discussing their children's sports activities and blah, blah, blah. But so no, I'm happy to be the clerk unless somebody else would covet that position. Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome. So second item on the agenda then was to approve the meeting minutes. And I had circulated those by email. I did notice that I had one mistake in the action items. I had said that I was writing the summary or the draft letter for the outreach when it should have been Aaron. So I made that change. And I can just share my screen here to.
It was a joint letter.
Yeah. Anyhow, were there any other questions on the minutes?
Not for me.
No. Okay, then let's just have a little roll call vote here. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aaron?
Aye.
Emily?
Approved.
And I vote to approve. Great. Okay. 2 down, 3 agenda items to go. Next on the agenda, we have the issue of, let's see here. We've got consultant, the statement of work, budget, and procurement. I know that Dan, I had said that I would speak to Chris Carmody, who's one of the people at the town who's involved with procurement. He's not the actual procurement person, but he was the one I was recommended to start with. He and I spoke a couple of days ago, and he basically explained that Shannon is the one who should handle any kind of the technical aspects of any procurement as it relates to a consultant. He said that as long as the total value is less than $10,000, then it doesn't need to go through a complicated bidding process. He says in that situation, we can get basically a proposal from the kind of consultant we'd like to work with. And if it's less than $10,000, the committee can approve that. Every contract undertaken by the town needs to be signed by the town manager. So the town manager would sign that, but it would be up to Shannon to facilitate that process. So that's good news. I don't know exactly what term we would be looking to hire someone for. Is this like a 6-month thing or like a 2-year thing? If it's 2 years, it's going to be a higher dollar value and more complicated. If it's shorter term, it's going to be a lower dollar value and kind of more expeditious.
So I'll add that. So I'm also, I think, with Emily on the land use committee, subcommittee. And we met earlier this week. And one of the things that's happened, which I think maybe folks are aware of, is that DCAM has, easily agreed to shift the sort of procurement of this initial master planning consultant vision leader to the town. Given, I don't know how many folks were on the last advisory board meeting, but Representative Cataldo spoke very passionately about thinking that the town and our committee was sort of the drivers of that work. And so it made sense to kind of shift the procurement of that to the town, facilitated by this committee, or the advisory board. So in the land use group, I think Patrick circulated the RFP that DCAM had started and that they transferred to the town as sort of a draft. And the land use group was reviewing that, but there is a section about community outreach being done by that individual or firm in that RFP. And so they asked that our group also review that to see if that aligned with what we hoped someone would do. I do think, John, to your point, there is probably a short-term need here that will get us, because this RFP hasn't gone out. It's going to be a while before it does. Once it does, it's going to take a while to get this group on board. So I think there probably is need, given the engagements that we have, for someone, at least in the short term. And then maybe, I don't know how that would play out in the future once the ultimate consultant is on board, assuming we want this single consultant or team of consultants to be the community outreach production. So that's, I think that was sort of my job, was to bring that as an agenda item, and certainly happy to discuss it.
From a timing standpoint, what's your sense as to what the timing, realistic timing would be before there's someone or a group on board?
I mean, I don't know for sure. I think my guess is that, I mean, the RFP is going to go out.
Take your time.
Sorry, choking on
You
my
okay?
water.
You okay?
We almost lost you.
I'm good. I'm good. So my sense is that the RFP is going to go out, and that it's going to take a while to get that both out and to get responses, and then an interview and a selection. So my guess would be it's probably a couple of months at the closest to get it back.
Right.
And so, Aaron, just can you explain to me a little bit more? As you know, I wasn't on the land use committee meeting this week, but so the RFP, once we review and we're okay with it, so are we, or is that committee taking that and running with it and executing it, or does DCAM need to approve that in some capacity?
I don't know exactly the approval process. I think DCAM would be involved, but Dan's here. Maybe he can explain it.
Okay.
Perfect
Phew,
timing.
Dan. Phew, Dan. Sorry about that, John.
Dan, by the way, you know why your code didn't work? I was trying
Why?
to get your code in Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Teams.
I assumed it was Zoom. So that
More. So your timing question is excellent. Shannon's here too, and she'll correct me if I get anything wrong, because this is hot off the press. But I think the process will be that we as the land use, let's talk about that first. We'll craft as I think Aaron suggested, if I heard it correctly, that we'll take our pass at the scope of work and the outlines of the RFP, and then we will say, okay, we think this is pretty much there. We'll share it with the town staff for them to make their comments. In the case of land planning, for example, it would be Elizabeth Hughes and maybe someone else that I haven't thought of. And then they would send it back to us and just say, yep, does this look right? And we would say yes or no, and yes, but, and then they would then take it and run the process, the procurement process. We can be involved in that, both at the interview level, and in a step that I think I missed in my explanation is that when it goes out to town staff, I would expect it to go out to DCAM as well, and just make sure, say, you guys good with this? And I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about for the community engagement, because I have not been with you in a couple of weeks, and that came up as a topic of conversation. The biggest question being, there is the possibility, do we want two separate firms, one doing community engagement, one doing land planning, or do we think that we want to combine them? We talked about the merits of separating them, which is you guys can get started sooner. So I'll stop, but that's what I have to share.
Dan, one question in order to answer that. So if we're talking about a consultant for the land planning, and apologies as I've been absent lately, but where is the committee thinking of ULI falling in that process? Like, is that off the table now? Because I think that's relevant to how we think about the consultant.
For me personally, Emily, it's not off the table. It's not now, but it's not off the table. And so I thought where I thought you were going to go with that was whether or not, because this is also a question that I'm expecting to talk with everybody about on Monday, which is I'm personally leaning more towards a land use planning firm led thing, rather than, there's been some discussion about whether we want it to be led by a real estate development type firm or CBRE or GALL or whoever. I'm insulting unintentionally people on the way, but the point is that I feel like it would be better served by a land use firm supplemented as necessary with that expertise. But again, you guys are the first people that are sort of hearing that.
Okay.
So my sense to think about, what this committee needs. And by the way, I like the idea of working with a multifaceted firm who can provide a variety of services, right? So if in the ideal world, you'd have a large enough firm where they have a communications group who can handle the communication stuff. That would be ideal. So that probably would be a good plan A. Plan B would be to get somebody who's more focused on the specific needs of this committee, but I think let's consider that a distant plan B. There is a need in the near term. I think, thinking about kind of the scope of work that Patrick put together originally, the two things that I feel we need in the near term are we need some legwork to be done. We'll talk about this next, but if we're going to send out a letter to all these stakeholders, we've got something like 80 different organizations for whom we need to identify the contact point, email address, and just so we can start communicating with them all, right? That's probably some number of hours. And then the other thing that became clear to me as I was just kind of trying to pull some stuff together over the last week is it's great to have the town website, but it's already out of date. When I say the town website, I mean the stuff about our project on the town website. It's already out of date. And in fact, that resource should be updated, I think, on a weekly basis. It's still kind of hard to find stuff about the project on the town's homepage, even though there's a link right on the front page. So in a minute we can talk more about that. But I think that having someone who can stay on top of the website and ensure that all of our communication materials are up to date, I think that's important. Yeah. So I wouldn't mind. I'd be delighted to hire someone for a couple of months or 3 months who could step in and start helping us right away. And Dan, before you joined, based on what I learned from my conversation with Chris Carmody, as long as the contract is less than $10,000, it's a pretty streamlined procurement process. You don't need to do public bidding or anything like that. So we could hire someone for 3 months, less than 10K, and get on top of these things we want to get ahead of.
Yeah, John, I'm in agreement. And I'm wondering, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being an and, right? Like whoever this more, near term, locally focused person is, working in conjunction with like a large, developer type contractor. I could just see that there's still being an opportunity to have both of them working in tandem potentially, right? So I think if we get started with I think what you described as plan B, which is near term local support, and then figuring out how that interacts with what would be kind of support from a larger, more integrated firm down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So in that regard, Dan, I guess maybe there are two action items. One is we certainly want to review that RFP when it's ready to see, how make sure that what's included is helpful to us. But the other would be then it would be good, I think, for us to identify someone, and maybe it's Laura Davis, who you and I spoke to previously, or maybe it's somebody else that someone in this committee knows, who could step in and probably give us something in the order of, I'm guessing at this stage it's 10 hours a week, maybe. It's not a huge amount of time, I don't think.
That's helpful, John. I mean, that's kind of what, Shannon can correct me, but that's kind of what we discussed in the previous meeting, that without the benefit of having caught up with you, it seemed like that there was a direction. There was a concern raised, but I think Shannon confirmed that it wasn't an issue, that if Laura is on a committee in town, she cannot be hired but I think Shannon confirmed that she was no longer on it. I didn't know that, but apparently that's an issue.
Did she say she moved out of town?
That's my recollection. Yeah,
Well,
I believe
in that case, it
she's
would be unusual for her to be on a town committee.
It's true.
So
Is she an independent consultant or does she work for a firm?
She's an independent.
Got it.
She's somebody who has like a marketing and community organizing background, Emily, in town. She knows Concord well. She was one of the organizers of Mothers Out Front, I think she said. So she's been very active in town. A benefit of her, and again, we were waiting for her to come back and tell us that she was interested in doing something like this. We haven't even confirmed that she has the
Okay.
but she would be good because she understands what we need to do and she knows Concord, right? And I think
Yep.
that's the battle right there, knowing
Yep.
all these acronyms, knowing how these town committees work, knowing, what the culture of the town is like.
Yep. Agree.
Okay, well then, so I said, do others in the committee have other people we might kind of talk to or that you think would be good at this role? No.
I don't.
Okay. In that case, why don't I, since I spoke to her previously with Dan, why don't I reach out to her, Dan, see if she's interested?
That would be
and-
great, John.
Okay, and then begin to kind of scope kind of what the cost and the time might be with her. And then I'll report back in 2 weeks to this group.
That would be awesome. And if I can be helpful or whatever, let me know. But
Okay.
John, is she, so and maybe I'm jumping ahead to an item, but you referenced sort of the website needing to update that. So you're saying she would be responsible for that as well in this sort of initial phase, or is that a separate engagement?
I think we don't know how long it's going to take to get this other firm on board. So I would say I would probably, and again, just brainstorming here, I would probably seek to engage over, say, 3 months for kind of a specific scope of work that would be around kind of supporting our outreach efforts and keeping the website up to date and keeping our materials up to date and also helping to create materials. But it probably would be capped at a certain number of hours per week. And by the time that engagement is nearing its end, we will know whether the big, consultant is going to be able to perform those roles, and so potentially we could extend her or not extend her.
Okay. That sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah, and just for what I just noticed, Shannon confirmed that Laura no longer has a conflict.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Got rid of that. Okay. So anything else on that topic before we move on? Okay, good. Next topic in the agenda that I'd like to talk about is this initial outreach to stakeholders. The stakeholder list, I'm just going to share my screen here for a moment. All right, can you guys all see that? All right, so this is the spreadsheet that has the list that we reviewed 2 weeks ago in document form. And so you see, I've got basically the stakeholders, every stakeholder's listed down the left side. We've got 104 rows, so probably over 100 stakeholders identified here. At the top, I have the ones that are named in legislation. And then going down from there, I put everything else just alphabetical. Okay, so it goes alphabetical from there. It includes kind of the category to which we had assigned them initially. One of the things that came up when I was talking with Dan earlier was the idea that we are the community outreach committee. We don't necessarily have to be the ones who are leading the outreach to every one of these stakeholders. And that, in fact, the Legislative and Government Affairs Committee is anxious to be the one to be interfacing with certain groups. So I added here this column that allows you to choose which committee, the Community Outreach, Legal and Government Affairs, or Land Use Planning and Strategy, would be the lead on communications with each stakeholder. And just as a first pass, I said, if you are named in legislation, that's the Legal and Government Affairs responsibility. And everyone else I put into community outreach. And there are a few exceptions to this. Relevant state agencies I gave to legal and government affairs, the state reps, legal and government affairs, Town of Concord Select Board, legal and government affairs, since they are all government, but everything else by default I just gave to us. The thinking was that if someone comes along, let's say that land use planning comes and says, oh, we want to be the ones who deal with the affordable housing advocates, we can discuss that and hand that off. I don't think that we need to own communication, but again, that's just my initial thinking on it. So I wanted to open that up and see if that makes sense to everybody.
But I guess my one thought is
John, I
that we
wonder-
would. Go
Sorry,
ahead, Patrick.
you go ahead.
My one thought was initial communication, right? Is this the letter that was drafted, et cetera? That's going to come sort of from this committee, and we would distribute that to all the stakeholders. You're saying we are drafting this letter and then we're handing it over to land use committee to send to their,
I think the
associated
I
contacts.
think we send the initial. We do the letter. We
Yeah.
get the initial letter out to everybody. Yeah.
Okay, I agree.
I mean, I think that's right. I think input's going to come from different sources to any number of folks on the advisory board and other avenues. So I think it's fine to organize it this way, and I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Sorry, it's
To
been
that
lagging.
point,
Patrick.
Thanks, John. I wonder if it makes sense to add a column here that is kind of like, if applicable, primary contact from advisory board, right? So for example, this week we had that outreach from Concord Academy. We could say that falls under, I guess, legal and government affairs, but in reality, it's legal state. But I think it's just helpful probably for him, presumably, to continue as kind of the POC for that specific stakeholder. And so just keeping track of that could be helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
which I think actually dovetails to what my question was. If we're, how are we tracking feedback that we're getting in from the outreach?
That's a good question. We'll ask our consultant to do it. That's a good question, and one we should think hard about. It's a good point.
Because I think Shannon was saying that we can't have like a live document. Because I was thinking we could have a shared document such as this, and I'm connected with X, point of contact, and then I can write sort of my comments and feedback on that. I don't know if something like that is permissible. That would be the easiest way to do it if it was a document everyone had access to.
Let's put that on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. And let's
Okay.
do a little investigation in the meantime. That's a really good question.
I also think that it was Elizabeth who spoke about this, but I think that there is a difference between this spreadsheet that you're looking at right now. If no one else is in it, Emily, and you make changes to it, to me, that feels fine. I think what Elizabeth was talking about, when people use a Google Doc deliberately all at the same time so people can see edits being made and stuff, I think that's what she was saying is not allowed with open meeting law, because it's almost like a way to get around like the communication. But if no one's in the document and then you edit it, I don't understand how that would be not permissible.
Okay.
Yeah, so to clarify, I think that if we were having even if we weren't on a Zoom together, but we we're collaborating actively by changing things and using the chat feature in the side of the spreadsheet, whatever, that would not be allowed.
Right.
But if you get a phone call from Concord Academy and you go into the spreadsheet to update it and say, I spoke to Concord Academy, that would be allowed.
Okay.
But it almost begs the question, like, do we need to have like a CRM platform or something to manage, conversations with different stakeholders? I hope it doesn't get that complicated, to be honest, but.
Well, You know what I was thinking? I can reach out to maybe Alexa or someone on the school committee. I'm curious how I'm just thinking of the naming of the middle school. And I don't know, Shannon, this is something you know, but how they kind of kept track of the various comments and name suggestions, et cetera, because it's, a little bit similar.
Emily, that'd be a great follow-up point for between now and.
I'll take care of that.
In fact, Emily, why don't you plan to come back if you're willing at the next meeting and basically recommend how we track input?
Sure. Yep, that's fine.
Awesome. The other thing that where I was saying we might need some legwork is off to the side for each of these stakeholders. We need to know who the contact is and we need their contact information, right? So we've got 100 stakeholders we got to gather that for. So if we may end up having to do that ourselves, but if we can avoid doing that, I think that would be nice. And so I guess not quite sure how to address that given our desire to get a letter out soon, but that is a piece of work we may have our consultant will do or may have to kind of assign to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's just time. So it's going on to the board, onto the website, saying agricultural committee, who's the chair, what's their email, Board of Health, who's the chair, Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, who's the chair. Shannon, I'll ask you, is that something the town might be able to do for us, as in you or somebody else in the town manager's office?
Sorry, John, could you repeat the question?
The question is, if you look at the spreadsheet I'm showing right now, we for each of the stakeholders, we need to know who the kind of the point of contact is and what their email is so that we can distribute this letter to them.
Yeah, we can do that.
That would be awesome.
That's great.
I will, if I haven't already, I'll send you a link. I'll make sure that you can access the spreadsheet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's huge. So then let's turn to the letter itself. And I think I have it here. Hold on one second. Okay, so Aaron, since the letter's your creations, want to describe it? And we can maybe agree to approve it.
Sure. So I think what I tried to do here was just try to set a stage for future engagement and just introduce ourselves. So the first part, this is really, I will say that the aim of this letter is really just informing the recipient about the process that we're in. It's not really introducing any active engagement at the moment, other than, providing a, email address for how they can reach us. But it's really just sort of to identify the group and what our goals are and how we're interested in getting feedback from their particular organization through this process.
Yeah, I think it does that. So what I'd like to do is if people, unless folks have comments on it, I think we should kind of package it up and get it ready to send out once we have the contact list. Shannon, I'm going to ask you another question about what the town's capable of. Could you guys handle sending out a letter like this? Kind of if I send you the final copy of it?
You want it electronically distributed or mail? Either is fine.
What do folks think?
I mean,
I'm a big fan of electronic.
Yeah, I don't think we need to mail it to all these groups.
Right. Electronic then, Shannon.
Once I start looking at that spreadsheet of stakeholders again, there likely will be some people that we might have to snail mail it to, like, a random state agency that we may not have a direct email for. But that's something that we can follow up on down the line.
Okay.
Yeah, wherever possible, electronic seems.
Yeah, that sounds good. Definitely for town committees, town groups will definitely be able to email.
Excellent.
Is there, sorry to interrupt, is there like a community outreach plan, like that we would put something more succinct than this letter, perhaps like in the Concord Bridge? Or is that casting too wide of a web at this stage?
Maybe when, I'm just going to jump in, maybe when we have an actual engagement, like there's a community charrette or there's a meeting or this is really, there's no action yet in this letter, I think is so it's really just sort of introducing ourselves, but I definitely think
Okay.
we would want to engage a broader audience once we have an actual event for folks to attend. Is my
Great.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I would love to have, I mean, I think we should have a calendar that's available on our site. That shows kind of upcoming items of all varieties, whether it's you know, when we expect us to distribute quarterly reports, or when we're presenting to the select board. I mean, it would be nice to have I know all the stuff is on the town, well, public meetings are on the town calendar. Third-party events like the League of Women Voters will not necessarily be on the town calendar. It would be good, I think, for us to have, you know, one integrated calendar available on our website. I think that's something that our consultant should be able to do as well. It's not going to change very often. It's part of the website, basically. All right, so we're all comfortable with the letter. I will take draft off the top. Did you guys like this? Should we put a little logo on the top? Did you guys like the logo? I see.
I haven't seen the logo yet. I will look at it.
All right.
Can you flash it up on the screen now, John?
Probably can. Let's see.
But yeah, I like the idea of a logo. Formalizes everything a bit.
Hold on. Is that, you guys see that?
Please zoom in a bit. Sorry, I'm reading and driving.
Oh, shoot. Hold on. Not sure why I just lost that. Oh, hold on. Darn it. Well, Emily, you have to wait a minute.
I got a good flavor for it. I liked
Okay,
it.
good. All right. Sorry. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
include it.
So I'll format it for that letterhead and then send it over to Shannon. Shannon can get the contacts and blast it out. Shannon, you're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. No,
Okay. Hold on. It's funny. My computer screen is like out of control here. I'm all discombobulated. Okay. So, next on our agenda, let's see. Okay. We got, Shannon distributed the DCAM questionnaire results. Dan, is that something we should be talking about? It's certainly interesting to see the number of people who replied. I was impressed with that number. You want to kind of give a little recap?
Yeah, I don't have a tremendous amount of information to share. It was presented to us at the last DCAM coordination meeting, and Taylor is the person that sort of took the lead in developing it. It's a lot of work, and I agree with you, John. There's a lot. There's a lot of interesting information there. I think the questions that you added, I'm glad that we started that conversation and beginning to get some ideas of what people are thinking about. I'm not quite sure what this committee should be doing with it, other than to have that as a data point. But they're not, and DCAM is not looking for any specific action item from us at the moment relative to it. I suspect the next time they do an outreach meeting, they'll have another version of it, and perhaps it will be that much more informed with what we know at that point. But that's probably what I have to share about it.
Okay.
I do, John, it's not on your agenda, but if we have time, it would be good to talk about, there's been some conversations from different people about the upcoming League of Women Voters meeting,
Yeah.
both in terms of content and participants, and the staff. Coming out of the meeting with Megan and Shannon, they've very generously, they've offered to assist you guys in any way that they can. So.
Okay. Well, so why don't we move on to that? Because that actually was on my list of things to talk about. I had said last meeting that I would throw together some slides about it, but I did want to get some input on what we ought to be saying. I'll say as a quick precursor too, that we heard from Janet Miller from Concord Can last night by email, basically suggesting that they had looked at their agenda of the meetings they want to hold, and they think it's probably premature for them to invite us in because they're really interested in talking about, how we can build sustainability into the design. And she quite rightly identified that we're not really ready for that yet. So she said, why don't we uninvite you for November, whatever it was, 18th, I think, and we'll have you back to some other meeting. So we don't have to speak to Concord Can at this point, which is great.
So-
but I think, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, just going to say that I saw that. They have, in interest of full disclosure, and I'm actually not quite sure how to respond to this request, but I would like to have, in particular, I'd like to have the community engagement's thoughts on it. They asked me, as Dan Gainsborough, now Communities, if I would consider going in and just doing a thing on sustainable housing. And I'm a little bit, other than the fact that probably like the rest of the people on the call, I'm pretty much out straight. I'm also a little bit anxious that I feel like I can't say anything in some respects without it feeling like it's potentially coming from this group. And so again, and I won't run away from it. If the consensus of this group is have at it, then I'll try to respond to it. But before I did, I wanted to check in with you guys.
I think this is one of the challenges. I've seen this a lot over the years, Dan, where you have people who are asked to be on certain committees because of expertise they have, and it often relates to their professional pursuits. We had this problem in spades on the Economic Vitality Committee, where we had a lot of Concord-based business people who were serving on the Economic Vitality Committee, and many of them do business in Concord, right? And so it turns out that they were often in an uncomfortable position where, like, well, how do I talk about, real estate development or, other business issues without, acknowledging that somehow it could affect me potentially. Speaking personally, I wouldn't be concerned about it. Recognizing that, this is you are a noted authority in this kind of stuff. You get a lot of experience. I can see why they'd want to hear from you, and I'd be comfortable with you doing it just from my point of view. Yeah. But I mean, I think you should just make sure that as a co-chair of the committee that that you have the town's support as well.
Okay.
I mean, my initial reaction though is that the subjects are very close, right? They're interested in hearing about the committee about sustainability, and then here they are asking you to talk about sustainability. I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other, but I imagine you're going to get questions in that discussion about sustainability in MCI.
Yeah, and I can imagine myself, to your point, just continually saying, well, not speaking as a co-chair, I can answer this question.
Mhm.
I just don't
mean,
want.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, there's not much to say about the MCI part. Like, we don't have anything to comment on sustainability wise. I'm sure everyone has high aspirations, but
Well,
it's not
yeah, if
like,
anything, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anything, I'd probably go back to the 2030 document and say, that's kind of where it was some of these ideas, the big goals were established, sustainability and otherwise. But
I think your point, Aaron, was, if I understood it, you're saying that even if they said, well, tell us about it, sustainability at MCI Concord, what can you say? There's nothing to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know most folks, people are asking me how it's going, and I'm like, well, we're getting ourselves organized. Like, there's nothing to report at the moment.
Right.
But
All right. So, Dan, I think you got to make the call on that personally, but thank you for our thoughts. In terms of League of Women Voters slide content, I don't know. We try to. Is there any? As I said, I'm happy to throw some slides together. I'd rather not try to design an entire presentation collaboratively right now, but rather come back with a draft for you guys. What are there thoughts? I would love to hear people's kind of headline thoughts on what do you think what should the presentation look like?
I guess I'll start. I think your letter is a great start. This is the process of how we're organizing ourselves. This is what you can sort of expect in terms of an overarching timeline. We're getting, as Aaron just said, we're getting ourselves organized. And you can expect to hear from community engagement and opportunities for participating throughout these different steps. You know, the data collection, and then the land planning, and then eventually turning it into zoning and other regulations. Just my thought.
Maybe I could use the that graphic that they had in the DCAM slide that showed the 24 to 28 timeline, right? Just as an organizing principle, and say that this is the overall timeline. We've broken into these 3 subcommittees. Here's the kind of the charge of each of them. And here's our plan from an outreach standpoint. We'll be communicating regularly. Here are our thoughts. It's going to be a short presentation.
Yeah.
It's mostly just, I think it's really just showing up, showing, that we're being responsive. And then
I think that's great, John. The other thing that I might suggest, although I've opened other people saying bad idea, that maybe just something that has the parcel, so people have an idea of the edges of this thing and how big it is and its relationship to things they know, like the Rotary. And I think that's real helpful. There's a part of me that, and I think this is not a good idea, but there's one of the things I did, and I don't know if I shared this with the rest of you guys yet, but I couldn't help myself. Just I took and looked at, I was very curious to see what 40, 50 acres looks like in Southfield, the Southfield neighborhood. Did I share that with you that I did that? So I just went on GIS and did it. And it was really kind of an eye opener. And so I don't think, as I said, I don't think we're ready to do something like that, but starting to lay the groundwork so that people can understand. One of the worst things I think planners do sometimes is and Aaron's probably going to smile at this, is they take a plan and then suddenly in one presentation and the next presentation, they rotate it. And people are like, where am I? What is this? Right. So just even setting up that kind of understanding, I think would be helpful, maybe.
I agree.
I
But
think
I'm not curious, how big
I
is that?
agree.
How many acres is Southfield Road?
So the great question, John. The whole thing, if you go basically from where we used to play, I guess we have soccer out there. I think it's like 250 acres or so.
Oh, wow.
I know. I was surprised by that.
I
So
would
basically,
have guessed it was less than 50. Honestly.
interesting.
Wow.
So this, if you go, I'm trying to remember the road. So it's not Belknap, it begins with an E, but if you take the way I looked at it is Sudbury Road.
Elsinore?
Thank you. Sudbury Road, the T easement, the river, and Elsinore. And that right there is about 50 acres. And I looked at how many homes were in it too. I can't remember exactly. It's like 150, I want to say.
Yeah.
And that, so it's just something kind of neat to think about, but
Interesting. Yeah. That's cool. Okay. All right. So I think I'll be doing some slides and I'll send those around as soon as they're ready. Anything else on our agenda for today? Nada?
Not here. Nada.
Okay. One thing that we haven't gotten into a good rhythm on is sharing kind of agenda items with Shannon. She's got to post the agendas at least 48 hours ahead of the meeting. There's no reason that we shouldn't give her information more than 49 hours ahead. First, in terms of future meeting dates, how do we feel about continuing with this every other week schedule, every other Friday? At this time, does that work for people?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll schedule for the next why don't we just say through the end of the year? So that would be today. Let's see here. So that would be today's the 18th. So that would mean November 1st, November 15th. And then because it's Thanksgiving, maybe we give ourselves the Friday after Thanksgiving off.
Yeah.
Seem reasonable? All right. So
yeah, and I
Shannon,
think I think November 1st is the League of Women Voters
Correct. Yeah,
thing. I don't know what time it is.
that's right. We said we might even not meet that day.
Yeah, I think it's probably similar timing.
And that counts as work. That meeting counts as work.
It's a public meeting. Yeah, we should know. I don't know off the top of my head what time that meeting is. Was it a first?
I thought it was 10:30, but I might be wrong.
Okay. Well, so what if, just for kicks, what if we showed up half an hour early for that meeting? Then we could talk about, the question we have about how we're gonna, Emily's recommendation for how we're gonna track input. And then we can do any fine tuning to the slides in the event we want to do that together.
I cannot make that event. I have a all day professional obligation, but
Lucky dog.
I wish you the best.
Actually, that's a good, I'm just looking at my calendar, Aaron. Hold on one second.
Shannon, do you remember offhand what time the League of Women Voters meeting?
Yeah,
is?
I just looked it up. It's at 10 a.m.
10 a.m.
And that's on, sorry, that's November 15th.
No, it's November 1st.
Okay.
So the idea would be we would meet at 9:30 in person on site, and then we could just it'll be a public meeting. So we would notice a 9:30 meeting, and then we would move to the league meeting. So I can make that.
Okay.
Aaron can't. So as long as Patrick can, then we'll have a quorum there.
I can make it if I'm needed, John.
Okay. No, I'm counting on you to be there.
Okay.
And then and I guess if not, we'll just have an informal review and tweaking of any slides, etc. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good. Anything else before we close? All right, let's see if there's any desire for community input. Linda?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, and again, thanks to all of you for all the work you're doing. I have not seen the full stakeholders list, because I'm not privy to that at this point, and I'm just concerned that we have ample opportunity to reach out to those who are over 50 in town, and not just the Council on Aging, because we've got a lot of people who don't necessarily use that as their conduit for information. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Okay. Ed, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to meet up with a subcommittee here. I've been lurking around on some of these subcommittee meetings for the last couple of weeks. I talked with Dan a couple of weeks ago. I represent, first of all, I'm from Framingham. I'm not from Concord, but I'm with the New England Velodrome and Sports Complex. We're a charitable organization looking to ultimately build a sports complex that is based on a velodrome, which is a cycling track. We've been looking for a community to find as a home and welcome us to put this together. The idea would be we'd provide several different opportunities for sports, besides just cycling, but we would envision a large running or walking track on the inside, an infield that would have several court, sports and activities, and maybe some extra space for other, say, yoga studios and whatever. But I'm just trying to introduce myself to the committee. And again, I'm still looking towards Concord and this whole redevelopment project. And to me, it looks like there could be some town interest in what we would have to offer. So I'll continue to follow this. And if anyone has any questions about it, I can also suggest the type of facility that we would envision. It could be anywhere from a smaller to a larger building. There's a couple different velodromes, but basically it's a 250 meter. It would be a 250 meter indoor facility. So.
All right. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, if there's no further business, I think we can adjourn.